Hey everyone, it's Kenji, and today we're going to make that TikTok famous baked tomato and feta pasta. And I apologize because I actually started it already and I realized halfway through that my card needed to be reformatted. So I've already got the tomatoes and feta in the oven. So if you haven't seen this recipe, I'm usually not one to jump onto viral recipe trends, but this one actually seemed really legit for a number of reasons, which I'll get into. But if you haven't seen that recipe, it's essentially you take what I've got here, which is cherry tomatoes, a block of feta cheese. You need to use Greek sheep's milk feta because the American stuff, the domestic stuff, is not creamy enough. The sauce will kind of turn gritty, whereas the Greek stuff will stay nice and creamy and fatty. Some cloves of garlic, and then I've also got a little bit of Flatiron Pepper Company chili flakes in here. You can use whatever chili flakes you want. I particularly like theirs because these guys. I particularly like these guys because they blend, they blend a number of different chilies. They have many different flavors, and they use very fresh, flavorful peppers, so a lot more flavor than your standard chili flakes. Anyhow, some olive oil, black pepper, that's it. No salt because the feta has plenty of salt in it, and then you throw it into a 400-degree oven for about 40 minutes. So that's been going for about 30 now, and it's going to take about another 10 minutes. Meanwhile, I'm going to get a pot of water going to boil some pasta, and then we just stir it all together, and it becomes this delicious pasta dish. The reason why this recipe works so well, aside from just the obvious flavor combination of garlic, olive oil, tomatoes, and feta, is that it relies on cherry tomatoes. Now, it's not summer, right? It's not the end of summer right now. It's not cherry tomato season. It's not tomato season at all. And generally, I would avoid using tomatoes out of tomato season because they generally don't have that much flavor. And the reason for that is because in order to ship tomatoes, they have to pick them when they're kind of underripe. Otherwise, they kind of squash themselves under their own weight while they're shipping. So they get picked underripe. They get artificially ripened in transport with ethylene gas, which is, it's a naturally occurring gas, but they artificially add it to make the tomatoes turn red. But they lack flavor and they lack juiciness. So cherry tomatoes, on the other hand, so the smaller the tomato, the easier it is to find good ones in the winter, and that's because of a thing called the square cube law, which is that as things get larger, their volume and therefore their mass will grow in 3 dimensions, whereas their footprint only grows in 2 dimensions. So their mass will cube, while their area, the area that's supporting them, will only double. Sorry, not double. Will square as opposed to cube. And so what this means is that the bigger things get, the more pressure they're putting on themselves. So that's why animals have a limited size. That's why buildings have a limited size. You can't just scale things up infinitely. So likewise, tomatoes, when they're smaller, they have a better ratio of support to mass than a larger tomato. So therefore, the smaller the tomato is, the more ripe it can get before it's picked because it won't squash itself under its own weight. And so cherry tomatoes tend to be much better than larger tomatoes in the winter. So cherry tomatoes in the winter, they can be just as good as they are in the summer. Obviously not if you have a cherry tomato plant in your backyard and you're picking it from the vine and it's still warm, those are the best, but supermarket cherry tomatoes can be really good. Cherry tomatoes are also higher in pectin than other types of tomatoes, which is what makes sauces kind of thicker. It's the carbohydrate that also makes jams and jellies thicker. But in the case of tomatoes, it makes tomato sauces kind of thicker and cling to your pasta better. So cherry tomatoes are a great choice for making pasta sauces out of season if you don't want to use canned tomatoes. So those are the reasons why I think this recipe is going to work. It does work very well. And as soon as this water comes to boil, I'm just going to throw my pasta in before it even comes to boil. I'm using my low water method of cooking pasta, and I know, because every time I do this, there's going to be comments saying you need to use a gallon of water for every 100 grams of pasta, or whatever it is. You need a large volume of pasta. You don't. And I've tested this myself in blind taste tests many, many, many times with multiple testers. Harold McGee has done it himself. With modern pasta, you don't really need a ton of water to cook it in. You really only need just enough to cover it. I'm doing about a half batch of this here right now, so I'm only going to cook probably about 8 ounces of pasta, 250 grams. That'll be enough for 2 adults and a kid. So we're going to let this pasta come up to a boil in salted water. Oh, and some people are going to say you must let the water boil before you add the pasta. You also don't really need to do that, as long as you kind of give the pasta a few gentle stirs so that they don't kind of fuse together as they're heating up. They will cook just fine, indistinguishable from if you dump them into already boiling water versus starting them in cooler water and letting them come to a boil. Yeah, so once this pasta is done cooking, it should be done right around the same time that the tomatoes, maybe the tomatoes will come out a little bit earlier. So I'll pull those out, I'll finish the pasta, and I will be back when all that's done. So I will see you all in just about 10 minutes or so. It might have been more or less, I'm not sure. Just a quick recap, by the way. So this is the tomatoes done. So what I had in here was about a pound of cherry tomatoes. So I don't know, there are different recipes out there, but I use about a pound of cherry tomatoes, a block of feta, which I don't know is like maybe 7 or 8 ounces, 6 ounces, 4 cloves of garlic that I just split in half, and then about 1/3 to 1/2 of a cup of olive oil. So actually a good amount of olive oil. This pasta is almost done, so while that pasta finishes up, I'm just gonna get some basil, which is the last ingredient. This is basil that's past its prime, but even past its prime, basil is still basil. And for something like this where it's gonna kind of wilt down into the sauce anyway, it doesn't really matter. I wouldn't use this basil for like I don't know, caprese salad or something, but basil's totally fine if it's starting to brown a little bit. If it's really excessive like that, I might just tear off that part of the leaf and use the rest. But you know, basil's one of those kind of delicate herbs that will start to turn brown even before it turns, you know, like mushy or gross, or even before it even loses its flavor. It's going to start to turn a little brown. All right, so get our basil. Those aren't great. Okay, and then I'm gonna chop it up. Real rough chopping this. When you chop herbs like this, the easiest way to rough chop them, just kind of roll them into a ball like that. Gather them up, roll them into a ball. Slice, slice, slice. Oh, Shabu. Shabu, come back in here. Sorry, I don't want her running outside right now. Give it a rough chop. Good girl. And then back and forth, across like that, and that's really all you need. I'm gonna do half of this basil, you know, like a good handful of it, maybe 3/4 of it actually, directly into this pan here. And that's gonna kind of wilt in and flavor the sauce. Let's test our pasta, see how close we are to done. So, very nearly there. All right. So this dish, by the way, it was originally appeared on a couple of Swedish food blogs. It's called uni feta pasta, which is baked feta pasta. Then it's been, of course, it went on TikTok and got like 60 million views, I don't know, a billion views. And then, of course, millions of other people have sort of covered it and written recipes. So I'm not doing anything new here. This is just one of those like viral recipes that I actually thought was legitimately good, which most of them are not. Which is why I'm making it here today. All right, the only real tweak that I'm doing here is when I drain my pasta. The original recipe has you just drain the pasta and stir it in. I'm gonna do what I do every time I make pasta, and what you should do every time you make pasta, which is save some of that pasta water, because that starchy pasta water is what is going to help emulsify the sauce and make it sort of creamier and stick to your pasta better. And it'll help get rid of some of that graininess that cheese can have. So we're gonna splash in a good amount of it there to start, and we might add a little more. So that was maybe a 1/4 cup or so. I'm gonna add my pasta, and then I'm just gonna stir, stir, stir. And you will see those tomatoes break down, that feta start to break down. And it should all form a nice sort of creamy mixture that really coats the pasta in a way that you want your sauce to. I don't know, I like my sauce to coat my pasta, don't you? Let's move this over here so we can get it on the other camera in some slightly better light. Does that look better? So it's gonna look a little watery at first. But then as that cheese really gets in, and as those tomatoes release their pectin, and you start to form an emulsion, between the oil and the pasta water. It's going to thicken up. One of the sort of general rules of thumb about emulsions is that, and an emulsion, by the way, is a sort of mixture of, a homogeneous mixture of two things that generally don't want to mix homogeneously. So most frequently in culinary terms, of course, that is an oil and water mixture. So in this case, the olive oil and the water released from the tomatoes, as well as the pasta water, as well as the water and the cheese. But an emulsion, a general rule of emulsions is that an emulsion is always going to be thicker than any of its constituent parts, just because of the way emulsions make it more difficult for sort of molecules to flow past each other, because it because in, you know, like a water in oil emulsion, for instance, like water molecules are all completely coated by oil molecules that form these kind of big clumps called micelles, and so those bigger molecule bunches don't flow as readily. So that's why, like, mayonnaise, which is made with, you know, eggs and oil, is much thicker than either eggs or oil on their own. And you can already see it happening here. So the cheese and the olive oil and that pasta water are forming an emulsion, and it's getting nice and creamy. And that's basically all we're looking for. And of course, this recipe, you can use more tomatoes or less tomatoes. If you have, if it's in the summer and you've got some nice Roma tomatoes, you can use those. You can use different herbs. It doesn't have to be basil. It could be parsley. It could be whatever you want, really. Oregano. Wonder what that is. All right. We're going to finish it off. Another little sprinkle of basil. And I think we are ready to taste. Let's give it a go, huh? Yeah, I'll take one out for you, Shabu, so you can taste them too. That is seriously delicious. Yes, excellent. All right, that's the dish. I hope you had fun. There you go, Shabu. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, I will see you next time. Bye-bye. Hey everyone, it's Kenji. There are 22 million kids in this country that rely on school lunches for nutritious meals. And with schools closed now more than ever, organizations like No Kid Hungry can use their support. So I'm asking you to join me. Click the link in the description below to donate some money. No amount is too small or too big. Thank you very much, and stay safe. Bye-bye.